Hey everyone, tonight we are diving headfirst into the warm, turquoise waters of the 18th century Caribbean. You're on the deck of a creaking merchant ship, the tropical sun beating down so hard you can practically hear the wood groaning. The air is thick with the smells of tar, salt, and something vaguely unsanitary coming from below deck. Out on the horizon, a strange sail appears. It's a moment that will plunge empires into a decade of chaos, all because of a piece of pickled human gristle. Frankly, given the state of 18th century naval medicine, which often featured more amputation than anesthetic, you probably wouldn't survive this encounter, let alone the long voyage home. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It's a huge help. While you're at it, post your location and local time in the comments. I always find it fascinating to see where everyone is tuning in from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The ship beneath your feet is the brig Rebecca, and she's seen better days. Her timbers are waterlogged and weary, and the rhythm of her rocking is less a gentle cradle and more a lurching stumble. You've been at sea for weeks, sailing out of Jamaica and heading back to Britain with a hold full of sugar, which sounds a lot sweeter than it actually is. The reality is a cargo of sticky, heavy barrels that attract every insect within a 100-mile radius. You are Captain Robert Jenkins, a man of middling success and, at this particular moment, rapidly diminishing patience. The year is 1731. The Caribbean is not the relaxed vacation spot we think of today. It's a simmering pot of imperial rivalries, a crisscrossing maze of trade routes, pirate dens, and naval patrols. And you, Captain Jenkins, are about to have a very, very bad day. The sail you spot on the horizon belongs to a Spanish patrol boat, a guardacosta named La Isabela. These vessels have the deeply annoying and legally sanctioned right to stop and search British ships like yours for contraband. It is the 18th century equivalent of being pulled over and having your entire car taken apart on the side of the highway because the officer thinks you might have an undeclared box of cigars. You give the order to heave to, a sigh of resignation escaping your lips. There's no point running. The La Isabela is faster, better armed, and its captain, Juan de Leon Fandino, has a reputation for being thorough to the point of theatricality. A longboat is lowered from the Spanish ship, and soon a boarding party is clambering onto your deck. They are a rough-looking crew, tanned to leather by the sun, armed with cutlasses and flintlock pistols. Fandino himself steps aboard, a man who carries the weight of the Spanish Empire in his scowl. He demands your papers, your cargo manifest, your full cooperation. You comply, of course. You're a merchant, not a naval officer. Your job is to move goods, not fight battles. You know the drill. His men begin their search, rummaging through your hold, tapping barrels, and generally making a mess of your carefully packed cargo. Historians still argue whether ships like the Rebecca were routinely engaging in large-scale smuggling, or were more often victims of predatory enforcement. For your part, you maintain your clean. A little side hustle here and there is just the cost of doing business, but nothing that warrants this level of disruption. The search turns up nothing. Fandino is furious. He's wasted half a day for nothing, and his pride is stung. He strides up to you, his voice a low growl. He accuses you of hiding contraband, of lying to an officer of the Spanish crown. You deny it, but your denial only seems to inflame him. This isn't about cargo anymore. It's about power. It is about the centuries of rivalry between Britain and Spain being played out on the sun-bleached planks of your tiny ship. The Spanish sailors, taking their cue from their commander, become rougher. One of them shoves you, another draws a cutlass. This is where things escalate beyond a routine stop and search. Fandino orders his men to seize you, your own crew, a small, unassuming bunch of merchant sailors, some of whom, as was common, are not even British, but maybe Swedes, Portuguese, or even freed African slaves, are hopelessly outmatched and can only watch in horror. You're dragged to the mainmast, your hands bound tightly behind you. The coarse rope bites into your wrists. Fandino stands before you, his face inches from yours. He tells you that your insolence and the insolence of all English smugglers will not go unpunished. He needs to send a message, and he chooses a truly unforgettable medium for that message. He draws his blade. It's not a fancy rapier, but a practical, heavy naval cutlass, honed for close quarters fighting. It catches the glint of the unforgiving sun. You brace yourself, expecting a blow, a fatal thrust. Instead, he grabs the side of your head. His fingers tangle in your hair, pulling your head to the side, exposing your left ear. For a bizarre moment, you wonder what he's doing. Then you feel the cold, sharp pressure of steel against cartilage. There is a surprisingly brief, shearing pain, a sickening wet crunch, and then a sudden shocking warmth as blood pours down the side of your neck. Fandinho steps back, holding the severed piece of you between his thumb and forefinger. He examines it for a moment, as if it were a curious seashell. Then he leans in close, his breath hot and smelling of cheap rum, and utters the words that will echo all the way to the halls of Parliament. Go, and tell your king that I will do the same to him, should he dare to do the same. He then, almost as an afterthought, shoves the bloody severed ear into your hand. Your own ear. It's a surreal, horrifying moment. He orders his men back to their boat, and just like that, they're gone. They leave you tied to the mast, bleeding, humiliated, and holding a piece of your own body. The laughter of the Spanish crew carrying on the breeze as they row away, all for a cargo of sugar that they didn't even find a problem with. It's safe to say there won't be a 5-star review of this interaction on whatever the 18th century version of Yelp was. You stand there, the deck sticky beneath your feet, the fate of empires resting quite literally in the palm of your hand. As your crew finally cuts you free from the mast, the reality of the situation begins to set in, fighting for attention with the searing pain on the side of your head. Someone presses a rum-soaked cloth to the wound, a makeshift bandage that stings with an almost comical intensity. Your first mate wraps the severed ear in a piece of sailcloth, preserving it with a solemnity usually reserved for a holy relic. And as you stumble towards your cabin, the warm Caribbean breeze suddenly feeling cold against your blood-soaked skin, you can't help but wonder how it all came to this. Why is the entire Spanish Navy seemingly obsessed with what's inside the hold of every British tub that sails these waters? The answer, like most big problems, starts with a piece of paper. A treaty, signed nearly 2 decades ago in a Dutch city you've never seen. You have to rewind to 1713. Europe is collectively exhaling after the long and bloody War of the Spanish Succession. It was a massive, continent-spanning conflict to decide who would get to sit on the Spanish throne, and by extension, control Spain's colossal and fabulously wealthy American empire. Britain came out of it looking pretty good, and at the negotiating table in Utrecht, they didn't just ask for land, they asked for something far more valuable: access. For centuries, the Spanish Empire in the Americas had been a closed system, a private party to which no other country was invited. All that silver from Peru, all that sugar from Cuba, was meant for Spanish ships and Spanish merchants alone. But the Treaty of Utrecht gave Britain 2 very specific, very shiny keys to the door. The first was called the Asiento de Negros. It was a monopoly contract, granting a British company the exclusive right to supply enslaved Africans to the Spanish colonies for the next 30 years. To our modern ears, it sounds monstrous, and it was. But in the cold, hard calculus of 18th century economics, it was the deal of a lifetime. A license to print money by trafficking in human lives. The contract was awarded to the South Sea Company, a name that should ring a bell for anyone familiar with catastrophic financial disasters. The hype surrounding the future profits from the asiento was so immense that it inflated a gigantic stock bubble. People from all walks of life invested their life savings, convinced they were getting in on the ground floor of something bigger than Apple, Amazon, and crypto combined. When the bubble burst in 1720, it wiped out fortunes and very nearly crashed the entire British economy. It turns out that profiting from a state-sponsored monopoly isn't as simple as it sounds, especially when your business partner doesn't particularly like you. The second key Britain received was the Navio de Permiso, or the permission ship. This clause allowed the South Sea Company to send just one ship of 500 tons per year to sell British goods at one of Spain's massive colonial trade fairs. Imagine being given the exclusive right to sell your merchandise at the Super Bowl, but you're only allowed to bring a single food truck. It was a tantalizing taste of a market that could make nations rich, but it was also incredibly restrictive. It was a crumb from a table groaning with unimaginable wealth. And this is where your problems, Captain Jenkins, truly begin. The treaty was a classic compromise that satisfied no one. For the Spanish, giving the British any access at all was a painful concession. Historians still argue whether the Spanish ever intended to fully honor the terms of the agreement, or if they saw it as a temporary concession from the start, a way to get the British off their back while they rebuilt their strength. They jealously guarded their colonial markets and viewed every British sail on the horizon with deep suspicion. To them, you weren't a simple merchant. You were a potential crack in the dam of their economic security. For the British, the treaty was an infuriating tease. They now had a legal foothold, but it wasn't nearly enough. British industry was booming. Factories in Manchester and Birmingham were churning out textiles, tools, and finished goods that the colonists in Spanish America desperately wanted and were willing to pay handsomely for. The demand was massive, and the legal supply was one ship a year. It created a perfect storm for an illicit economy. It was an open invitation for a whole generation of captains, men exactly like you, to say, "To hell with the rules," and engage in a little creative free trade. This wasn't just a few bad apples. It was a fundamental part of the British maritime economy in the region. And that, in turn, is why men like Juan de Leon Fandinho exist. The guardacostas weren't just patrols. They were the enforcers of a system under siege, and they operated with the righteous fury of men protecting their family fortune from an army of ambitious thieves. They had every right to be suspicious because 9 times out of 10, they were probably right. And if they had to chop off a few body parts to make their point, well, that was just a risk you took in this line of work. Usually. So you find yourself in this frustrating economic landscape, a place of immense opportunity gated by absurdly tiny legal doors. The memory of your own recent painful encounter with Spanish enforcement is still fresh, a throbbing reminder of the risks. But the allure of profit is a powerful anesthetic. You're a captain, you have a ship to run, a crew to pay, and investors back in Bristol or London tapping their fingers waiting for a return. That one permission ship per year isn't going to cut it. It's barely a drop in the ocean. So you do what any enterprising, morally flexible person of your time would do. You become a smuggler. Let's step onto the deck of a different ship now, one that's prepared for this clandestine game. You're not just carrying sugar anymore. Your hold is a treasure trove of forbidden goods, a floating catalog of everything a Spanish colonist secretly desires. There are bolts of fine English wool and light, airy Manchester cottons, far superior to the coarse fabrics the official Spanish trade monopoly provides. There are crates of metal goods, axes, knives, pots and pans, the kind of durable everyday items that are frustratingly scarce and expensive in the colonies. You're not just a lawbreaker, you're providing a much desired service like an 18th century Amazon Prime, but with more cannon and a much stricter return policy. The game is played in the shadows. You avoid major ports like Cartagena or Havana. Instead, your charts are marked with secret coves, hidden inlets, and quiet, unnamed islands where you can meet your counterparts, a local plantation owner, a well-connected merchant, perhaps even a crooked colonial official will have sent word through a network of whispers that they are in the market. The transaction itself happens under the cloak of night. Your longboats, oars muffled with strips of cloth, glide silently towards a secluded beach. There's no fanfare, just the tense, quiet exchange of your manufactured goods for the wealth of the New World. You return to your ship with sacks of silver coin, the legendary pieces of 8, or valuable raw materials like tobacco, cocoa, exotic hardwoods, and vibrant dyes like indigo or cochineal, a brilliant red pigment made from crushed insects that is worth a fortune back in Europe. It's a system built on a shared, unspoken agreement to ignore the rules laid down by distant kings. And the British have turned bending these rules into an art form. Take the Navío de Permiso, that one legal ship. The Spanish probably thought that by limiting the size to 500 tons, they were containing the problem. That was a serious underestimation of British ingenuity when it comes to making money. The system they devised was simple and brazen. The official permission ship would sail into the designated port for the trade fair and begin selling its goods. But it would be secretly shadowed by several smaller, faster vessels known as tenders. Each night, these tenders would sneak up to the main ship and covertly reload its hold. So, the 500-ton ship became a magical portal, a floating warehouse that never seemed to run out of stock. It was a massive, collective middle finger to the spirit of the treaty. Of course, this entire shadow economy couldn't function without a little help from the inside. Historians still argue whether the local Spanish colonial governors were genuinely trying to stop this trade, or were often just turning a blind eye in exchange for a cut of the profits. In all likelihood, it was a mix of both. An ambitious governor might make a show of cracking down, seizing a few ships to look good for his superiors back in Madrid, but a more pragmatic governor would recognize the value of the illicit trade. It kept the local elites happy with a steady supply of luxury goods, and a well-placed bribe ensured his own pockets were lined with silver. It was a deeply corrupt system where the official laws of the empire were often just a starting point for negotiation. Your success as a smuggler often depends less on the speed of your ship and more on the greed of the local Spanish official you're dealing with. It's not a bug in the system, it's a feature. But for every corrupt official willing to look the other way, there's an honest one. And for every successful nighttime rendezvous, there's the risk of a sail appearing on the horizon at dawn. That's when the romance of smuggling evaporates, replaced by the cold, hard reality that you are committing a crime against one of the most powerful empires on Earth. The ship that spotted you isn't a fellow merchant. It's a predator built for this exact purpose, crewed by men who have a vested and violent interest in upholding their nation's laws. And that predator has a name: the guardacosta, the Spanish Coast Guard. But you need to immediately banish any modern image you might have of a professional, state-run service with neat uniforms and search and rescue helicopters. This is something entirely different. The ship bearing down on you now, a swift sloop of war cutting through the waves, is likely a private vessel. Its captain isn't a commissioned officer of the Spanish Royal Navy, but an entrepreneur of violence, a man who holds a letter of marque from the local governor. He is, for all intents and purposes, a licensed privateer. This is the crucial detail that makes these encounters so terrifying. The men on that ship aren't paid a steady salary by the King of Spain. Their primary income, their entire motivation for being out here in the blistering sun, comes from a share of whatever they can confiscate from smugglers like you. Your cargo of fine English wool, your crates of iron tools, and especially those heavy sacks of silver. That's not just evidence, that's their payday. This transforms the dynamic entirely. They aren't just enforcing the law, they are hunting for profit. It is the 18th century maritime equivalent of a tow truck driver who gets a bonus for every car he impounds, whether it was illegally parked or not. There is a powerful financial incentive to find you guilty. You watch through your spyglass as they close the distance. You can begin to make out the men on her deck, and they are not the disciplined, uniformed sailors of a naval vessel. They are a motley, hardened crew, assembled from every corner of Spain's sprawling empire. For the quirky tidbit, it's worth remembering that these crews were fantastically diverse. The captain might be a Basque from northern Spain, a man who learned the sea by hunting whales in the North Atlantic. His crew could be a mix of Cubans who know every reef and current in these waters, Catalans, with a long tradition of Mediterranean seamanship, and maybe even a few renegades and deserters from other nations, an Irishman with a grudge against the British crown, or a Frenchman looking for adventure. They are united not by a shared nationality, but by a shared desire for prize money and a deep-seated belief that these waters belong to Spain. This unique, profit-driven structure is precisely why the British merchants and the Spanish authorities have such wildly different views of their actions. To the Spanish governor in Havana, these guardacostas are a vital, cost-effective way to police a vast and untamable coastline. To you, staring down the barrel of their forward cannon, they are little more than pirates with a permission slip, and so, historians still argue whether the actions of the guardacostas represented a disciplined enforcement of law or devolved into a form of semi-legalized piracy, blurring the lines between patrol and predation. When a captain like Juan de Leon Fandino stops a ship like the Rebecca, is he upholding the Treaty of Utrecht, or is he just looking for an excuse to plunder a foreign vessel? The answer probably depends on which end of the cutlass you're on. A puff of white smoke erupts from the bow of the pursuing ship. A moment later, you hear the crack of the cannon and watch as a ball of iron skips across the water, landing just short of your stern. It's a warning shot, a command to heave to and prepare to be boarded. You have a choice to make, and you have to make it now. Your merchant vessel is broader in the beam, designed to carry cargo, not to race. The guardacosta is built for speed and combat. Running is a fool's errand. You could fight, you have a few small cannons, and your crew is armed with muskets, but you are hopelessly outgunned. Fighting would be suicide. So with a sinking heart, you give the order to strike your sails. You watch as the privateers, the lawmen, the predators close the final distance. The grappling hooks are thrown, and the same scene that played out on Robert Jenkins' deck begins to unfold on yours. A boarding party swarms over the rails, their faces grim, their cutlasses drawn. Every single one of them is hoping you've been foolish, that you haven't had time to hide your illicit gains because your loss is their fortune. This is the brutal reality of the cat and mouse game you've been playing. You've just been caught. And as we know from your colleague, Captain Jenkins, the consequences can be far worse than just losing your cargo. Sometimes they take a souvenir, but let us leave the fate of that anonymous smuggler hanging in the balance and return to you. You are Robert Jenkins, and your story didn't end with capture. In a strange way, it's just beginning. The Guardacosta La Isabella has sailed away, leaving you and your crew violated and shaken, but with your ship still under your command. They didn't seize your vessel, which was an odd mercy, perhaps because they found no contraband to legally justify it. They just took your ear and your dignity. Your immediate problem, aside from the excruciating pain, is medical. An open wound in the tropics on a filthy 18th century ship is a death sentence waiting to happen. Infection is a far greater killer than any Spanish cannon. Your crew, using their limited knowledge, cleans the wound as best they can, likely with more of that all-purpose medicinal rum, and bandages it tightly. Your first port of call is British-held Jamaica. You storm ashore in Port Royal, a man on fire with a righteous grievance. You don't just head to the nearest tavern to drown your sorrows and tell your tale, though you probably do that too. You are a man of process. You march straight to the office of the governor. Here you make a formal, sworn statement, a deposition that is entered into the official records. You detail the entire incident, the name of your ship, the date, the name of the Spanish captain, Juan de Leon Fandino, and the brutal, humiliating act of aggression. This is a crucial step. Your story is now on paper, a documented complaint from a British subject against an agent of the Spanish crown. It's no longer just a sailor's yarn, it's a diplomatic incident in the making. But what about the main piece of evidence, the ear itself? The one Fandino so theatrically gave back to you. You can't exactly carry it around in your pocket. So, you do the most logical and deeply weird thing you can think of. You preserve it. You find a small glass jar, perhaps one that once held spices or ointments, and you place the grisly object inside. You then fill the jar with a preserving agent, most likely brandy or some other strong spirit. It's essentially pickling. Your own ear is now floating in a jar of booze in your captain's cabin, a grotesque little specimen bobbing gently with the motion of the waves. It's the ultimate message in a bottle, except the message is a promise of future conflict, and the bottle contains a body part. With your complaint filed and your ear safely bottled, you eventually sail for home. The journey across the Atlantic takes months. Day after day, you are on that ship, going about the mundane tasks of a captain, checking the rigging, rationing the water, navigating by the stars. And all the while, that jar sits on a shelf in your cabin. What do you even think about when you look at it? Is it a symbol of your humiliation? A constant simmering reminder of the injustice you suffered? Or does it over time become just another bizarre curiosity in a life at sea? Historians still argue whether Jenkins was a diligent keeper of this bizarre relic from the very beginning, planning to use it as a tool for justice, or if he largely forgot about it until it became politically convenient. Perhaps you just became that captain with the ear in the jar, a quirky reputation to have in the rough and tumble world of British mariners. You arrive back in Britain in the summer of 1731. You tell your story to the directors of the South Sea Company, to other merchants, to anyone who will listen. The story does cause a minor stir. It's one more entry in a growing ledger of Spanish atrocities against British shipping. Your official complaint from Jamaica works its way through the slow, grinding gears of government bureaucracy. The British government lodges a formal protest with Spain. The Spanish, in turn, promise to investigate. And then, nothing happens. The world doesn't grind to a halt. There are no immediate calls for war. Your story is shocking, but it's just one of many. The government, led by Prime Minister Robert Walpole, is committed to a policy of peace and diplomacy. They have no interest in starting a major European war over a single merchant captain's ear. And so, you and your pickled appendage fade from the headlines. The jar is placed on a mantelpiece or in a cabinet. The years begin to tick by. 1732, 1733, 1734. The dispute with Spain simmers on, with more ships being stopped, more goods confiscated, more sailors roughed up. But your specific, personal injury becomes old news. The fuse that was lit on the deck of the Rebecca has been burning, but it's a very, very long fuse, slowly sizzling its way through 7 years of diplomatic inertia and public forgetfulness, waiting for the right moment and the right political firestorm to finally reach the powder keg. 7 years is a long time. It's long enough for a memory to soften, for an outrage to fade into a historical footnote. For 7 years, your ear has sat in its jar, a silent, pickled testament to a private trauma. The world has moved on. But now, the year is 1738, and the political winds have shifted dramatically. The quiet simmering of tensions between Britain and Spain has reached a rolling boil. The constant harassment of British merchants has created a groundswell of anger, and a powerful political faction in Parliament, the opposition patriots, seize its moment. They are tired of the peace policy of the Prime Minister, Robert Walpole. They want a war, a glorious, profitable war to open up Spanish markets and assert British naval dominance. But they need a poster boy for their cause. They need a story. They need you. The perspective shifts. You are no longer Captain Jenkins. You are now a member of Parliament, sitting on a hard wooden bench in the stuffy, candle-lit chamber of the House of Commons. The air is thick with the smell of sweat, wool, and wig powder. It's a cramped, noisy, and deeply important room where the fate of the nation is being decided. The opposition has been parading a series of merchants and sailors before a committee to testify about their mistreatment at the hands of the Spanish. Today's star witness is a certain Captain Robert Jenkins. His name is vaguely familiar, a half-forgotten incident from years ago. You lean forward, intrigued. A man is brought to the bar of the house. He's of average height and build, his face weathered by years at sea. He speaks with a clear, steady voice, recounting the events of that day back in 1731. He tells the hushed chamber about the boarding of his ship, the Rebecca. He describes the arrogance of the Spanish commander, Juan de Leon Fandino. He repeats the insult Fandino delivered against the British king. And then he describes, in plain, unvarnished language, how he was tied to the mast and how the Spaniards sliced off his ear. A murmur of horror ripples through the assembled politicians. This is far more compelling than dry statistics about confiscated cargo. This is blood and guts. This is an insult to every Briton. Then comes the moment that will be seared into the nation's memory. According to the story that will sweep through London like wildfire, one of the MPs asks Jenkins what he was thinking, what his immediate reaction was at the very moment of his mutilation. Jenkins draws himself up to his full height and delivers the line that will make him a legend. "I recommended my soul to God," he declares, his voice ringing with conviction, "and my cause to my country." The chamber erupts. This isn't just a victim. This is a patriot, a hero. And then, the masterstroke of political theater. He reaches into a bag or a box and produces the evidence. It's the jar, the very same jar you've been keeping for 7 long years. He holds it up for all to see. Inside, floating in the murky brandy, is the shriveled, brown, unmistakable shape of a human ear. It is a moment of pure, shocking drama. It's one thing to hear about an atrocity. It is another thing entirely to see the proof of it held aloft in the hallowed halls of Parliament. It's like presenting a murder weapon in the middle of a trial. It's irrefutable. It's horrifying. It's perfect. Now here is where history gets a little fuzzy, a little more interesting. Historians still argue whether Jenkins actually produced the ear in Parliament, or if the dramatic story of its presentation was a masterful piece of political theater invented by the press and the opposition. If you look at the official, dry-as-dust minutes from that committee meeting, there is no mention of a pickled ear being presented as evidence. Not a word. The story comes from newspaper reports and journal entries written after the fact, embellished and amplified for a public hungry for outrage. But in a way, it doesn't matter if it physically happened. The story was told, and everyone believed it. It became true in the telling. In the 18th century media landscape of pamphlets and coffeehouse gossip, the tale of the captain and his ear went viral. Watching from your bench, you can feel the mood in the room shift irrevocably. All of Prime Minister Walpole's careful arguments about the economic costs of war, about the need for diplomatic solutions, suddenly seem weak and cowardly in the face of this visceral symbol of Spanish brutality. The opposition has its weapon. Robert Jenkins, the forgotten merchant captain, has been transformed overnight into a living symbol of national honor, and his severed ear is the rallying cry for a war that now feels not only justified but absolutely necessary. The theatrical shock of the ear in the jar has now fully energized the room, and you can see the panic begin to set in on the government benches. Your eyes are drawn to one man in particular, the architect of British policy for the last 2 decades, the Prime Minister, Sir Robert Walpole. He is a large, imposing figure, but at this moment he looks like a man watching a carefully constructed dam begin to crack. For 17 years, Walpole has governed Britain with a simple, effective, and deeply unfashionable philosophy: peace. He is in many ways Britain's first true Prime Minister, a master of political patronage and financial management who believes that the nation's strength comes from a full treasury and bustling trade, not from glorious, ruinously expensive military adventures. His unofficial motto has always been, "Let sleeping dogs lie." And the opposition has just paraded a snarling, 3-headed Cerberus into the middle of Parliament. You watch as Walpole tries to regain control of the situation. He rises to speak, his voice a bastion of calm reason in a sea of rising hysteria. He doesn't dispute the truth of Captain Jenkins's story. He condemns the act as a brutal outrage. But then he pivots. He speaks of the bigger picture. He reminds the chamber of the immense cost of a full-scale war with Spain. He talks about the national debt, still a heavy burden from previous conflicts. He points out the sheer foolishness of disrupting the vast, complex, and mostly peaceful trade network with Spain and its colonies just to avenge one man's ear, however tragically lost. He argues for patience, for diplomacy, for using sanctions and negotiations to resolve the dispute without resorting to the cannon and the cutlass. It's a sensible, pragmatic, and completely logical argument, and it has absolutely no chance of working. His opponents, a coalition of ambitious young politicians who call themselves the Patriots, can smell blood in the water. They see Walpole not as a wise statesman but as a corrupt, cynical old minister, clinging to power at the expense of national honor. They mock him openly, calling him Sir Blue String, a sneering reference to the prestigious blue ribbon of the Order of the Garter that he always wears. To them, his pleas for peace sound like cowardice. His talk of financial restraint sounds like an excuse for inaction. They have spent years railing against his administration, and in Jenkins's ear, they have found the perfect symbol to crystallize all their frustrations. And so, you witness a master politician beginning to lose his grip. For years, Walpole has expertly managed Parliament, using a combination of patronage, sharp debate, and sheer force of will to keep his agenda on track. He's the guy who always knows where the votes are, but he is now facing a force that cannot be bought or reasoned with: raw, populist outrage. His logical arguments about budgets and treaties are no match for the simple, powerful image of a British captain being mutilated by a sneering Spaniard. It's like trying to argue complex economic theory with someone whose house is on fire. Historians still argue whether Walpole's peace policy was born from genuine wisdom about the ruinous costs of war, or from a cynical desire to maintain his own political power by avoiding risky conflicts that could easily go wrong and bring down his government. Perhaps it was a bit of both. He was a pragmatist after all, And he knew that nothing ends a political career faster than a failed war. He tries everything. He speaks in the House, trying to calm the hotheads. He works behind the scenes, pressuring the Spanish ambassador for a quick, decisive apology and compensation, something he can present as a victory for diplomacy. He knows that if he can just lower the temperature, give the public some kind of concession from Spain, the war fever might break. But it's too late. The story of Jenkins' ear has escaped the confines of Westminster. It's spreading from the coffee houses of the elite to the taverns and shipyards, and it's being shaped and amplified by the very people who want Walpole out of power. The Prime Minister is no longer just fighting an opposition party. He's fighting a narrative. And it's a narrative that is far more compelling than his balance sheets. He is a man of prose in an age that is suddenly demanding poetry, however bloody. You are no longer a politician but a citizen. You walk the muddy, bustling, and gloriously chaotic streets of 1730s London. The story of Jenkins' ear, having exploded out of Westminster, is now everywhere. It's a virus of righteous indignation, and it spreads not through the air but through ink and paper. The 18th century is in the midst of a media revolution. Literacy is on the rise. Printing presses are clattering away in hundreds of little shops, and for the first time, public opinion is becoming a powerful, tangible force in national politics. And right now, that force is being laser-focused on the single, overriding issue of war with Spain. You can't escape it. As you pass a print shop, you see a crowd gathered around the window, roaring with laughter and anger at the latest political cartoon. These cartoons are the memes of their day, cheap, easy to produce, and devastatingly effective. In one, you see a bloated, sleeping Robert Walpole, his pockets stuffed with gold, ignoring the British lion, which is having its tail twisted by a scrawny, sneering Spanish monkey. In another, Captain Jenkins is depicted as a noble hero, holding his bleeding head while a monstrous Spanish inquisitor laughs maniacally. The imagery is crude, direct, and incredibly powerful. You don't need to be able to read to understand that your country is being humiliated, and your leader is too corrupt or cowardly to do anything about it. Then there are the pamphlets, sold on every street corner for a penny. They have sensational titles like The Spanish Insolence or A Sailor's Revenge. Inside you read embellished, often completely fabricated accounts of Spanish atrocities. Jenkins's story is repeated, but now it's joined by dozens of others, each more horrifying than the last. They are tales of British sailors thrown into filthy dungeons, of merchants robbed blind, of the national flag being trampled underfoot. The poems and ballads are even more potent. In the smoky haze of your local tavern, you hear men singing a new patriotic song about brave British tars who will make the Spanish dogs pay for their crimes. It's catchy, it's simple, and it makes you want to buy another round and toast to the damnation of Spain. And everywhere you see Jenkins' famous quote, the one he supposedly delivered in Parliament. "I recommended my soul to God and my cause to my country." This single sentence has become the ultimate slogan. It's the "Make Britain Great Again" of its time. As a quirky historical footnote, you find this phrase printed not just in pamphlets but on commemorative mugs, plates, and little trinkets. It's a marketing campaign for war, and it is wildly successful. But how much of this is real? Historians still argue whether this surge of patriotism was a genuine grassroots movement from the public or a carefully orchestrated AstroTurf campaign manufactured by the political opposition. The answer, most likely, is both. The grievances of the sailors and merchants were real. The anger was authentic. But the patriot opposition, with its wealthy backers and savvy political operatives, took that authentic anger and amplified it 1,000 times over. They funded the pamphleteers, they commissioned the cartoonists, and they made sure that the anti-Walpole, pro-war message was relentless and unavoidable. They created an echo chamber where the only acceptable opinion was that war was the only honorable option, and it works on you. Day after day, you are bombarded with this narrative. You talk about it with your neighbors. You argue about it in the coffee house. Slowly but surely, the complexities of the situation are sanded away, replaced by a simple, satisfying story of good versus evil. Britain is the victim. Spain is the aggressor. Peace is cowardice. War is honor. Sir Robert Walpole, the man who has kept the country stable and prosperous for nearly a generation, starts to look like a traitor. The pressure builds, a great wave of public fury that begins to crash against the doors of government itself. The mob is demanding action, and a mob once roused is not known for its patience or its appreciation for diplomatic nuance. You are back in the thick of the political storm, watching Sir Robert Walpole, a man looking increasingly weary, play his last card. The pressure from the public, fanned into a roaring bonfire by the opposition press, is now unbearable. He knows he cannot survive politically if he simply ignores the calls for action, but he is still desperate to avoid a full-blown war. So he puts all his energy into securing a last-minute diplomatic solution, a deal he can wave in front of Parliament and the public as proof that his methods, the methods of peace and negotiation, still work. In January of 1739, after frantic negotiations, he gets it. It is called the Convention of Pardo. On paper, it looks like a masterpiece of sensible compromise, a way for everyone to save face and step back from the brink. Walpole presents it to Parliament with a sigh of relief. The terms are straightforward. For a brief moment, it seems like it might work. Walpole champions it as a victory. He got the Spanish to admit fault and to pay up. War has been averted. But he has critically misjudged the mood of the nation and underestimated the ruthlessness of his opponents. The Patriots immediately tear the convention to shreds. They aren't interested in compromise. They are interested in Walpole's political scalp and beyond that, a war of conquest. They find the treaty's weak spot and attack it with surgical precision. This is where the quirky, devilish details of international finance come in. The opposition reveals that the $95,000 compensation payment from Spain is not quite as straightforward as it seems. This is the ammunition the opposition needed. Their speeches in Parliament are masterpieces of righteous fury. £27,000, they roar. Is that the price of British honor? Is that what a freeborn Briton's ear is worth? They paint the convention not as a diplomatic victory, but as a national humiliation. They point out that the core issue, the aggressive searching of British ships that started this whole mess, hasn't been renounced by Spain at all. It has just been kicked down the road to some toothless committee that will probably debate for years and achieve nothing. And so you watch the deal unravel. Historians still argue whether the Convention of Pardo was a genuine, workable peace treaty sabotaged by a warmongering opposition, or a fundamentally flawed document that merely papered over the cracks of an insoluble dispute. Was it a real chance for peace destroyed by jingoism, or was it just a stalling tactic that failed to address the root causes of the conflict? Whatever the truth, the public perception is what matters. The same print shops that vilified Walpole now vilify his treaty. Cartoons depict the British lion being sold for a handful of coins. The public, already primed for war, sees the convention as a final, unforgivable insult. The deal collapses completely. The South Sea Company refuses to pay its $68,000 debt to Spain. In response, the King of Spain refuses to ratify the convention and withholds the $95,000 payment. The entire diplomatic structure, so painstakingly built by Walpole, falls apart. He is left with nothing. His last attempt to build a bridge to peace has been burned down by his enemies, and he is now standing on a cliff edge with a cheering, furious crowd behind him pointing towards the sea and screaming for war. There are no more options. There is no more room to maneuver. Word count, 1095. The collapse of the Convention of Pardo is the final straw. You are standing in the gallery of the House of Commons, and you can see it on Sir Robert Walpole's face. The fight has gone out of him. He has spent the better part of a year trying to hold back the tide, using every political trick and diplomatic lever at his disposal. But the tide of public opinion, whipped into a frenzy by his opponents and crystallized by the grotesque totem of a pickled ear, has proven too strong. He has to choose between leading the country into a war he doesn't believe in, or resigning in disgrace and letting his enemies do it instead. He chooses what he sees as the lesser of two evils. He will stay in power, and he will give the people the war they are screaming for. In the autumn of 1739, the official decision is made. Walpole, the great man of peace, formally advises King George II to declare war on the Kingdom of Spain. On October 23rd, the declaration is made public. You are now out on the streets of London, and the city is transforming before your eyes. The low hum of commerce is replaced by a rising roar of celebration. Heralds on horseback ride through the main thoroughfares, stopping at key intersections to read the formal proclamation of war to the gathered crowds. And with every reading, the cheer that goes up is deafening. This isn't the somber, fearful mood you might expect at the start of a major conflict. This is a party. It's a city-wide festival. From every church steeple, the bells begin to ring, not in alarm, but in joyous peals, as if celebrating a royal wedding or a great military victory that hasn't even happened yet. It's like the whole country just won the World Cup, except the game hasn't even started. Bonfires are lit in public squares and on street corners, the flames leaping high into the autumn sky. Barrels of ale are rolled out into the streets, and people drink toasts to the king, to the navy, and to the damnation of Spain. You get swept up in the crowd, a river of jubilant humanity flowing towards the heart of the city. Everyone around you is smiling, laughing, and clapping strangers on the back. But what are they actually celebrating? Historians still argue whether Britain's primary motivation for war was the protection of its trade, the pursuit of new colonial territory, or simply a surge of irrational nationalistic pride. Looking at the faces in the crowd, you suspect it's mostly the latter. They're not celebrating complex trade agreements or geopolitical strategy. They are celebrating the simple, intoxicating idea of being British, of being powerful, and of finally getting the chance to give a bloody nose to an old and hated rival. It is the pure, unthinking joy of jingoism. But as the bells of London ring out, there is one man who hears not celebration, but a death knell. Sir Robert Walpole sits in his office listening to the sounds of the city-wide party he was powerless to prevent. His political arch-nemesis, the Prince of Wales, is seen toasting the Declaration at a tavern near Temple Bar, personally encouraging the mob. Walpole is isolated, his long era of peace shattered. As he listens to the endless clang of the bells, he is said to have turned to a colleague with a grim, weary look on his face, and uttered one of the most prescient lines in political history. "They may ring the bells now," he says, his voice heavy with resignation. "They will be wringing their hands soon." He knows what the cheering crowds do not. He knows that war is not a festival. It is a voracious beast that consumes treasure and lives with equal indiscriminate appetite. He knows that the romantic vision of a quick, glorious victory is a fantasy, and that the reality will be one of disease, logistical nightmares, and brutal, bloody combat far from home. The people are celebrating the start of a story they think they know the ending to. Walpole, however, is terrified of the chapters yet to be written. The party is in full swing, but the bill, he knows, is coming due. The bells have fallen silent, the bonfires have burned down to embers, and the national hangover is beginning to set in. The party is over, and now the hard, practical work of making war must begin. The abstract desire for victory has to be translated into tarred rope, gunpowder, and cannonballs. The nation needs a hero, a man of action to lead the charge, and it finds one in a fiery, opinionated, and supremely confident naval commander named Admiral Edward Vernon. Your perspective shifts once more. You are now a young sailor, perhaps a midshipman, standing on the bustling docks of Portsmouth. The air is a chaotic symphony of gull cries, shouted orders, and the rhythmic creak of block and tackle. You are assigned to the fleet sailing for the Caribbean, the main theater of this new war, under the direct command of Admiral Vernon himself. He is the man of the hour, the walking embodiment of the nation's aggressive new mood. Vernon isn't just a sailor, he's a politician, a member of Parliament who is one of the loudest voices in the opposition, relentlessly attacking Walpole's peace policy. He is the tip of the spear that the war hawks have been so desperate to unleash. Vernon's fame, and the reason you are sailing on this specific mission, stems from a single audacious boast he made on the floor of Parliament. While Walpole and his ministers were fretting about the strength of Spain's fortified treasure ports in the Americas, Vernon stood up and scoffed. He declared, with the unwavering confidence of a man who knows he's right, that these forts were massively overrated. He claimed he could personally sail to the Caribbean and capture one of Spain's most important strategic ports, Portobelo on the coast of Panama, with a squadron of just 6 ships of the line. It was a stunning claim, a direct slap in the face to the government's cautious pessimism. Now, with war declared, the government has called his bluff. In essence, they've said, Fine, Admiral. You wanted this war. You think it's so easy? Here are your 6 ships. Go and prove it. And so you find yourself aboard his flagship, part of this small high-stakes expedition. Historians still argue whether Vernon's boast was a piece of calculated political bravado to win favor with the opposition, or a genuinely held belief based on his deep knowledge of the region, his defenses from his earlier service. As you watch him stride the quarterdeck, a man radiating an almost terrifying level of self-assurance, you're inclined to believe he means every word. The journey across the Atlantic is long and miserable. You are crammed into the damp, creaking belly of a wooden warship with hundreds of other men. The food is a monotonous rotation of rock-hard ship's biscuit, probably infested with weevils, and heavily salted beef that's as tough as shoe leather. But there is one small comfort: the daily rum ration. And here, you experience one of Admiral Vernon's most lasting and peculiar legacies. Vernon is a stickler for discipline and efficiency, and he believes that sailors getting drunk on their daily ration of neat rum is bad for the fighting trim of his fleet. So he institutes a new policy. The rum is to be mixed with water. This simple act of dilution makes the ration less intoxicating and encourages the men to drink it in one go rather than hoarding it. The sailors naturally grumble about their watered-down spirits. They nickname Vernon Old Grog after the waterproof grogram cloak he often wears in bad weather. The name sticks, and soon the drink itself becomes universally known as grog. In a stroke of accidental genius, Vernon also encourages the addition of lime or lemon juice to the mixture, a decision that will have a massive, if not yet understood, impact on preventing the dreaded disease of scurvy. He's less an admiral and more the Navy's first wellness influencer. Weeks turn into a month. You survive the storms, the bad food, and the watered-down rum. Then one morning, the lookout's cry echoes across the deck. Land ho! You scramble to the railing and stare. There on the horizon, rising from the shimmering turquoise sea, is the hazy green coastline of Panama. As you draw closer, you begin to make out the shapes of stone fortifications, the sentinels of the Spanish Main. This is it, Portobelo, the target of the Admiral's famous boast. The fate of this entire expedition, and perhaps the early course of the whole war, now rests on whether the man they call Old Grog was a brilliant strategist or just a very convincing loudmouth. The morning of November 21st, 1739, dawns hot and humid. You're on the deck of the flagship, the HMS Burford, part of a line of 6 British warships sailing calmly into the wide bay of Portobelo. All the months of preparation, all the Admiral's confident words, have led to this moment. Ahead of you, the town nestles in a crescent-shaped harbor, guarded by 3 stone forts. The largest, dominating the entrance, is the formidable Castillo de Hierro, the Iron Castle. It looks exactly as imposing as its name suggests. A quiet tension settles over the crew. The ship has been cleared for action, the gun crews are standing ready, and the Marines are assembled on deck, muskets in hand. This is it, the first real test of the war. Admiral Vernon gives the order. The Burford leads the attack, sailing directly towards the Iron Castle. The silence is shattered by the thunder of the first Spanish cannon shot, a puff of white smoke blooming from the fortress wall. The ball screams overhead and splashes harmlessly into the sea. Then it's your turn. The command fire rings out, and the world dissolves into a deafening rolling roar as the broadside cannons on your port side unleash hell. The entire ship shudders from the recoil, and the air is instantly thick with the acrid, sulfurous stench of gunpowder. You watch as your volley smashes into the stone walls of the fort, sending chips of rock flying. The Spanish return fire, but it's sporadic and inaccurate. It quickly becomes clear that Vernon's intelligence was spot on. The formidable-looking fortress is a paper tiger. The Spanish garrison is drastically undermanned. There are barely enough gunners to service the dozens of cannons mounted on the walls. It is a classic case of an intimidating security system, with nobody home to actually monitor the cameras. Vernon presses his advantage. "Boarders away," is the next cry. You are part of a landing party, scrambling down a rope ladder into a lurching longboat alongside a company of red-coated Marines. As your boat and several others are rowed furiously towards the shore, you feel incredibly exposed. You're a sitting duck for the Spanish gunners on the ramparts. But Vernon has a plan for that. The cannons on the ships shift their ammunition. They are no longer firing solid round shot to break the walls, but canisters of grape shot. This turns the massive naval guns into giant shotguns, spraying the tops of the fortress walls with a hail of musket ball-sized projectiles. It is devastatingly effective. You can see the Spanish soldiers abandoning their posts, unable to stand in the open to fire down on your approaching boats. You hit the beach and storm the lower batteries of the iron castle. The resistance is minimal. The few Spanish soldiers there are either killed in the initial volley or flee up the hill to the main fort. You and your comrades swarm up the ramparts, and within minutes the British flag is being raised over the iron castle. Seeing the main defense crumble so quickly, the governor of the town realizes the situation is hopeless. By the next day, the entire port has surrendered. The great vaunted Spanish fortress of Portobelo has been taken by 6 British ships in less than 24 hours. It's a stunningly swift and decisive victory, and you are left to wonder, how did it happen so easily? Historians still argue whether the Spanish defense was genuinely incompetent, or if they were simply starved of the resources and manpower needed to defend what was, at that moment, a strategic backwater. The great treasure fleets weren't in port, so the town was on a low-security footing, its garrison depleted. You haven't so much defeated a lion as you have kicked over a sleeping dog. In the aftermath, Admiral Vernon proves to be as shrewd a politician as he is a commander. He strictly forbids his men from looting the town or harming the civilians, a rare act of discipline that wins the respect of the local population. He seizes the Spanish ships in the harbor, confiscates about 10,000 silver pesos for the crown, a modest sum, but symbolic, and then carries out his masterstroke. He has his demolition crews spend the next 3 weeks systematically destroying the fortifications, using captured Spanish gunpowder to blow the forts to smithereens. He isn't just capturing Portobelo, he is erasing it from the map as a military threat. When the dispatches carrying the news of your victory finally reach Britain, the nation explodes in a frenzy of celebration that dwarfs even the declaration of war. It is a massive, unequivocal triumph. Admiral Vernon, the man who made the impossible boast, has delivered. He is no longer just a loudmouth politician. He is a national hero, the second coming of Sir Francis Drake. The victory provides the perfect validation for the war party. A spectacular "I told you so" that silences all criticism. The country now has proof that the war is not only just, but winnable. And that, as you're about to see, is a cause for a serious, nationwide party. You are back in London and the city has gone completely mad. If the declaration of war was a party, the news of the victory at Portobelo is a full-blown national carnival. The dispatch ship carrying Admiral Vernon's report arrives in March 1740, and the official announcement is read to a jubilant crowd at the Admiralty. The news spreads through the city faster than a fire in a shipyard. The initial celebration was based on hope and patriotic anger. This one is fueled by the intoxicating proof of success. Walpole's grim prediction about people wringing their hands is now a national joke. The only ringing happening is the ringing of bells from every church in the city, which peal day and night. The name Portobelo is suddenly on everyone's lips, a magic word synonymous with British glory. And soon it's not just on their lips, it's on the map. You hear that a farm lane in the countryside west of London is being renamed Portobelo Lane in honor of the victory, the very same street that will one day become the famous Portobelo Road Market. It's a trend that sweeps the nation and its colonies. All across Britain, from Scotland to London, and across the Atlantic in places like Dublin and the American colonies, new streets, taverns, and even whole settlements are named Portobelo. It's a permanent geographical monument to a single brilliant naval victory. This wave of euphoria needs a soundtrack, and the nation's composers are happy to provide one. In the summer of 1740, you attend the first performance of a new masque, a fashionable blend of music, theater, and dance, at the country estate of the Prince of Wales, who, you'll remember, is the leader of the political opposition. The show is about the ancient Saxon king, Alfred the Great, but its real purpose is to celebrate the current political moment. The finale features a brand new song with music by Thomas Arne. The lyrics are a thunderous declaration of national ambition. As the singer's voice soars over the orchestra, The chorus rings out across the manicured gardens. Rule Britannia. Britannia, rule the waves. Britons never, never, never shall be slaves. It's an instant sensation. It perfectly captures the triumphant, defiant, and increasingly imperialistic mood of the country. It becomes the unofficial national anthem, a song that defines how Britain sees itself and its place in the world for the next 200 years. The victory also unleashes a tsunami of merchandise. Admiral Vernon becomes the first modern media celebrity, his face and his victory endlessly commercialized. His gruff, determined portrait is suddenly everywhere. You can drink your ale from a commemorative mug with his face on it, eat your dinner off a plate depicting the bombardment of the Iron Castle, and carry a snuff box with his fleet engraved on the lid. Medals are struck by the thousands, cheap little trinkets that allow everyone to own a piece of the victory. It's Vernon mania. If this were today, he'd have his own Funko Pop and a line of action figures. You see these items for sale in shops all over the city, and it makes you wonder. Historians still argue whether this explosion of commercial patriotism was a genuine reflection of public sentiment, or a cynical marketing ploy by merchants and manufacturers to cash in on the war fever. The truth is likely a blend of the two. The public was genuinely ecstatic, and savvy entrepreneurs, seeing a rabidly enthusiastic customer base, were more than happy to meet the demand. It's patriotism and capitalism working in perfect, profitable harmony. This all creates a dangerous political atmosphere. The victory at Portobelo is seen as the ultimate vindication for the war. It was easy, it was glorious, and it was relatively bloodless. The British public becomes drunk on this success, convinced that the Spanish Empire is a rotten old structure, ready to collapse at the first proper push. The cautious realism of Walpole is forgotten, dismissed as the cowardly rambling of an old man. The nation is now gripped by a collective hubris, a belief in its own invincibility. If Vernon could do so much with just 6 ships, what could be accomplished with a truly massive fleet? The question hangs in the air, pregnant with ambition. And the government, riding this tiger of public enthusiasm, begins to plan its next move, something on a scale that will make the raid on Portobelo look like a minor skirmish. The nationwide party following the fall of Portobelo eventually subsides, replaced by a feeling of immense and slightly terrifying national ambition. The victory with just 6 ships was the appetizer. Now the British public and its government, drunk on success, are ready for the main course. The question echoing from the taverns to the halls of Parliament is simple. What's next? If a small squadron could so easily humiliate the Spanish, what could a truly great British armada accomplish? All eyes turn to the ultimate prize, the jewel in the crown of the Spanish Main, Cartagena de Indias. You are no longer a sailor on a small raid. You are part of something unimaginably larger. Cartagena, located on the coast of modern-day Colombia, is not just another port. It is the Fort Knox of the Spanish Empire in the Caribbean, one of the most heavily fortified cities in the world. It is the primary port where the vast silver wealth from Peru and the treasures of South America are gathered before being shipped to Spain. To take Cartagena would be to rip the heart out of Spain's colonial economy. It would be a blow from which the Spanish Empire might never recover. The plan is audacious, breathtaking in its scope, and it is a direct result of the overconfidence bred by the easy victory at Portobelo. The British government, with Walpole's dissenting voice now a muted whisper, goes all in. You find yourself back at Portsmouth, but the scene is unrecognizable from the modest departure of Vernon's earlier squadron. The sea as far as the eye can see is a dense forest of masts and rigging. This is the largest amphibious expeditionary force ever assembled in British history. The numbers are staggering. More than 180 ships are gathered, including nearly 30 massive ships of the line, each a floating fortress bristling with up to 100 cannons. The total manpower is close to 30,000 men, a combination of seasoned sailors, Royal Marines, and a huge contingent of land-based Army regulars. It is a D-Day level invasion force for the age of sail, an instrument of overwhelming power designed to crush any and all opposition. The entire project radiates an aura of absolute, unshakable certainty. They're not just hoping for a victory, they have pre-ordered it. And this vast force has a diverse and in some cases questionable makeup. You might be a veteran redcoat, hardened by service in Europe. Or you might be a new kind of soldier. As a quirky but important detail, a significant portion of the land forces are freshly raised regiments from Britain's American colonies. You could be a young farmer from Virginia, lured by the promise of adventure and a share of unimaginable Spanish treasure. Your commander is a colonial gentleman named Lawrence Washington, the older half-brother of a young boy named George who, back on the family plantation, is no doubt listening with rapt attention to the stories of this grand adventure. But as this colossal force makes its final preparations, a fatal flaw is already embedded in its command structure. Admiral Vernon, the hero of Portobelo, is in command of the fleet. But the thousands of soldiers are under the command of an army general, Thomas Wentworth, a man with little experience in this kind of warfare. The two men famously dislike and distrust each other. From the very beginning, there is a clash of egos and a division of command that will prove catastrophic. They can't even seem to agree on the ultimate goal of the mission. Historians still argue whether the primary objective was to capture and permanently hold Cartagena as a new British base, or simply to sack it for its legendary wealth and then leave. This lack of a single, clear objective will lead to hesitation, bickering, and fatally flawed decisions when the fighting actually begins. For now, though, none of these future problems are apparent. In late 1740, the Grand Armada set sail from Britain, a majestic and terrifying sight. The mood is one of supreme, almost arrogant confidence. The sailors and soldiers have the songs of Rule Britannia in their heads and the stories of Portobelo on their lips. They believe they are invincible. As you stand on the heaving deck, watching the coast of England disappear over the horizon, you feel you are a part of a great and glorious chapter in your nation's history. You are sailing to a victory that will be celebrated for centuries. You have absolutely no idea of the nightmare that awaits you. The vast British Armada plows its way across the Atlantic, a floating city of arrogant certainty. But now, we must leave them. Our perspective must shift. You are no longer a British soldier smelling of salt and ambition. You are now inside the walls of Cartagena de Indias, and the air you breathe is thick with humidity and fear. You are a Spanish soldier, a militiaman, maybe just a citizen, and the news has arrived. A British fleet of unimaginable size is sailing towards you. It is a force so large that its very description sounds like a biblical plague. Panic begins to ripple through the city's sweltering streets. People are burying their valuables, praying in the churches and looking to the city's massive stone walls with a new sense of doubt. The city seems doomed. But Cartagena has a protector. And as you watch the frantic preparations to defend the city, your eyes are drawn to the man in command, the governor and military chief, Admiral Blas de Lezo y Olavarrieta. He is not a handsome man. He is not a whole man. In fact, he looks less like an admiral and more like the battered survivor of some terrible industrial accident. And in a way, that's exactly what he is. The industry, of course, being 3 decades of constant, brutal naval warfare. Let us take a quick inventory of the man who stands between the British Armada and the wealth of an empire. He stands on a sturdy wooden peg where his left leg used to be, lost below the knee to a cannonball at the Battle of Vélez, Malaga. His right arm ends in a stump at the shoulder, amputated after a musket ball shattered the bone during the siege of Barcelona. A black patch covers the empty socket where his left eye once was, an injury he picked up as a young officer at the Battle of Gibraltar. He is a walking, talking, breathing catalog of combat injuries, a man who has left pieces of himself scattered across the battlefields of Europe. His own men, with a mixture of awe and gallows humor, have nicknames for him: Patapalo, Pegleg, and more bluntly, Medio Hombre, half-man. By any logical measure, this man should be retired, living out his days in a quiet villa in Spain. Instead, he is here, on the battlements of Cartagena, facing down the largest amphibious force ever assembled. And as you watch him, you see not a flicker of fear. Blas de Lezo is stubborn, irascible, brilliant, and possessed of an iron will that makes the city's fortifications look flimsy by comparison. He has seen more action in his missing limbs than most of the British commanders have in their entire careers. He knows this city, its harbor, its channels, and its forts better than any man alive. He has spent years studying its defenses, and he knows that while he is catastrophically outnumbered and outgunned, he is not defenseless. His strategy begins to unfold before your eyes. You see him directing work crews to deliberately sink old ships in the main shipping channel, blocking the most direct route into the inner harbor. He is forcing the massive British fleet to take a longer, narrower, more dangerous approach, one that will expose them to his cannons. He repositions his limited artillery, moving guns to the most critical defensive points. He drills his small motley force of defenders, a few thousand men composed of Spanish regulars, local colonial militia, and even a contingent of native archers armed with poison-tipped arrows. He is a master of asymmetrical warfare, preparing to make every inch of ground cost the British invaders a river of blood. Historians still argue whether de Lezo's defensive strategy was a pre-planned work of genius, or a series of desperate but brilliant improvisations in the face of overwhelming odds. Looking at his one good eye, glinting with fierce intelligence, you'd be willing to bet on the former. One afternoon you are on the main bastion, the Castillo San Felipe de Barajas, a monstrous stone fortress that looms over the city. You see the admiral there, leaning against a parapet. He raises a spyglass to his eye, his gaze fixed on the shimmering horizon. And then you see it too, a single sail, then another, and another. Within an hour, the horizon is no longer a clean line between sea and sky. It is a solid wall of white canvas. Vernon's Grand Armada has arrived. The unstoppable force has just met the immovable object. You are back with the Grand Armada, a soldier on a crowded transport ship, bobbing in the sweltering Caribbean heat off the coast of Cartagena. The weeks at sea have been tedious, but now the target is in sight, and a jolt of nervous energy runs through the thousands of men crammed onto the decks. You stare at the distant city, its massive stone walls shimmering in the tropical haze. It looks formidable, certainly more impressive than Portobelo. But then you look around you, at the endless forest of British masts, at the rows of gun ports on the ships of the line, and any flicker of doubt is extinguished. How could anything possibly stand against this? The mood is less one of grim determination and more like the cocky swagger of a heavyweight champion entering the ring against a local amateur. The siege begins not with a bang, but with a period of frustrating inaction. The fleet establishes a blockade, and for days the ships sail back and forth just out of range of the Spanish guns. Aboard your vessel you hear the rumors begin to fly. The commanders are arguing. Admiral Vernon, a man of action emboldened by his easy victory at Portobelo, wants to use his fleet's overwhelming firepower to smash the defenses quickly. General Wentworth, the cautious and methodical army commander, wants a more traditional textbook land siege. It is the classic clash between a sailor who wants to kick the door down and a soldier who wants to study the blueprints first. Their bickering and indecision are the first cracks to appear in the expedition's gleaming facade of invincibility. It is from this initial squabbling that the entire disaster will eventually grow. Historians still argue whether the initial British plan was fatally flawed from the start, or if it could have succeeded with better cooperation between the Army and Navy commanders. Was it a bad plan executed by bickering fools, or a decent plan ruined by their infighting? From your perspective, it just feels like you're wasting time while the enemy watches and waits. In a moment of classic 18th century military theater, Admiral Vernon sends a frigate under a flag of truce to deliver a message to the Spanish governor, demanding he surrender the city to avoid unnecessary bloodshed. You later hear about the reply from the Spanish commander, this Blas de Lezo character. The message comes back, defiant and blunt, to the effect that the Spanish know how to die for their king, and are quite prepared to do so. The time for talking is over. Finally, a decision is made. The main channel into Cartagena's inner harbor, you discover, has been blocked by sunken ships. The first clever trick from the Spanish commander. Your fleet is forced to attack a much narrower and better defended secondary entrance, a channel known as the Boca Chica, or Little Mouth. This channel is guarded on both sides by stone forts. This is where the assault will begin. In early March 1741, the attack is unleashed. You have a front row seat to the most terrifying display of firepower you have ever witnessed. Several of the largest British warships move into position and open fire on the Spanish forts. The sound is a continuous, deafening thunder that seems to shake the very air you breathe. Hundreds of heavy cannons are firing in a coordinated, relentless bombardment. You watch as massive iron balls smash into the stone walls, sending plumes of dust and debris high into the air. The sheer weight of metal being thrown at the Spanish positions is overwhelming. Surely you think no one can survive that. The defenders must be utterly broken, their defenses pulverized into rubble. The confidence that ran through the fleet before is now surging. This is going to be Portobelo all over again, just on a slightly larger scale. The plan is to pound the forts into submission from the sea, then land General Wentworth's troops to mop up the survivors. It all seems so simple, so logical, so certain. But as the bombardment rages on, you fail to appreciate three crucial things. First, that the Spanish commander, the half-man, has anticipated this exact line of attack. Second, that stone forts are incredibly resilient to cannon fire. And third, that a far more dangerous and silent enemy is already beginning to stir in the hot, stagnant air of the British camp. The thunderous bombardment of the Boca Chica forts grinds on for days, then weeks. It is not the quick, decisive blow everyone expected. The Spanish defenders, led by the indomitable Blas de Lezo, are proving far more resilient than the token force at Portobelo. The stone walls are chipped and scarred but refuse to crumble. Progress is slow, bloody, and frustrating. Finally, General Wentworth gives the order for his troops to land. You are one of thousands of soldiers, redcoats and American colonials alike, who are rowed ashore to establish a beachhead and set up land-based cannon batteries to help pound the forts into submission. The moment your boots hit the sand, you realize you are in a different world. The heat is a physical presence, a heavy, wet blanket that smothers you. The air is buzzing with insects you've never seen before, and the ground underfoot is a swampy morass of mud and tangled vegetation. And you are dressed for a pleasant autumn day in England. This is where you encounter one of the expedition's most idiotic and deadly flaws: the uniforms. You are wearing a thick, heavy coat of red wool, with a leather stock tight around your neck. It's a uniform designed for marching in the cool climes of Europe, and it is catastrophically unsuited for the tropics. Within minutes of any exertion, you are drenched in sweat. Your skin chafes raw, and the risk of heat stroke is immediate. It feels like the uniforms were designed by a committee that thought the Caribbean was just south of Ireland. You and your comrades begin the back-breaking work of hacking down jungle, building earthworks, and dragging massive cannons through the mud. It is grueling, exhausting labor. And then the other enemy, the silent one, makes its appearance. At first, it's just a few men. A soldier in your company collapses during his watch, complaining of a splitting headache and a burning fever. The next day, another man is unable to stand, his body racked with violent chills and muscle aches. The surgeons, with their limited 18th century knowledge, diagnose it as seasoning sickness, a natural, if unpleasant, process of acclimating to the tropical climate. They are tragically, catastrophically wrong. Within a week, the sickness is everywhere. What started as a trickle becomes a flood. Men are dying, not in combat, not from Spanish cannonballs, but in their own filthy tents and hammocks. The main culprit has a name the sailors whisper with dread: Yellow Jack, yellow fever. You watch in horror as healthy men are struck down. The symptoms are terrifying. First, the fever and the crushing headache. Then the terrible aches in the back and limbs. After a few days, the skin and eyes of the victim begin to turn a ghastly yellow color as their liver fails. The final, fatal stage is the infamous black vomit, as the patient begins to hemorrhage internally. There is no cure, no treatment. You either survive it or you die, and most men die. This is the grim, central truth of the Cartagena campaign. For every British soldier or sailor killed by Spanish action, at least 8 will be killed by disease. The real enemy is not Blas de Lezo's garrison. It is an invisible army of pathogens, thriving in the unsanitary conditions of the military camp, and likely carried by the swarms of mosquitoes that you are constantly swatting away. Historians still argue whether the British command fully understood the dangers of tropical diseases before the expedition, or if they were largely ignorant of the scale of the threat. Did they sail into a predictable death trap out of arrogance and ignorance, or were they simply victims of the limited medical science of their time? Either way, the effect on your army is devastating. The camp becomes a vast open-air hospital. The fighting force shrinks daily. The number of men fit for duty plummets. The spirit of arrogant confidence that carried you across the Atlantic has evaporated, replaced by a grim, fearful despair. The triumphant songs have died on your lips. The promise of Spanish silver seems like a mockery. You are no longer fighting for glory or for treasure. You are fighting for your life against an enemy you cannot see, shoot, or comprehend. And all the while, the Spanish forts, battered but defiant, still stand. After more than 2 weeks of brutal bombardment and bloody fighting, the battered Spanish defenders of the Boca Chica forts finally withdraw. You and the rest of the British force surge through the channel and into Cartagena, as vast inner harbor. For a moment, a wave of relief and triumph washes over the fever-ridden army. You've done it. You've breached the outer defenses. Victory seems within your grasp. Admiral Vernon is so supremely confident that he immediately fires off a dispatch to London, announcing that the city is as good as taken. Medals are prematurely struck in England, bearing the inscription, "The Spanish Pride pulled down by Admiral Vernon." It is perhaps the most embarrassing case of counting your chickens before they hatch in military history. Because now, from the harbor, you get your first clear view of the real challenge. Looming on a hill between you and the city proper is the monstrous fortress of Castillo San Felipe de Barajas, more commonly known as Fort San Lazaro. It is not just a fort, it is a man-made mountain of stone, with sloping, interlocking walls designed to create lethal fields of fire. Taking the Boca Chica forts was like breaking down the Garden Gate. San Lazaro is the reinforced steel door to the vault. The old arguments between the commanders erupt again, now with more venom and desperation. Your army is dissolving. Yellow Jack is claiming dozens, sometimes hundreds of men every single day. General Wentworth, watching his effective fighting force melt away, knows he is in a race against time. He argues for a slow, methodical siege to bombard the fort into submission. Admiral Vernon, largely immune to the disease ravaging the land forces, is contemptuous of the army's slow pace. He pushes, bullies, and goads Wentworth into immediate, decisive action. Historians still argue whether the decision to launch a frontal assault was a result of flawed intelligence, a desperate gamble by Wentworth to win before his army ceased to exist, or pressure from a deeply impatient Admiral Vernon who wanted the whole business finished. Whatever the reason, the order is given and it is a death sentence. You and the remaining able-bodied soldiers are to conduct a direct frontal assault against Fort San Lazaro, at night. In the pre-dawn darkness of April 9, 1741, you are roused from your tent. You are given your orders, a swig of rum for courage, and you fall into formation. There are perhaps 1,500 of you, a mix of British redcoats and American colonials, the last remnants of a once mighty army. You begin the march, stumbling through the darkness, weighed down by your musket and equipment. The plan is a mess from the start. Your colonial guides get lost in the unfamiliar terrain. The assault columns get separated. The element of surprise is completely lost. By the time you reach the base of the hill, the Spanish are waiting for you. The slopes of San Lazaro erupt in a storm of musket and cannon fire. The night is filled with screams, explosions, and the high-pitched whine of ricocheting balls. You charge forward up the steep, grassy slope, your comrades falling all around you. Your objective is to reach the base of the main wall, raise your scaling ladders, and storm the parapets. You make it. Against all odds, you and a few hundred other men reach the towering stone wall. The ladders are brought forward, and in this moment, the entire catastrophic failure of the expedition crystallizes into a single absurd fact. The ladders are too short. They don't reach the top of the wall. It's a blunder of such epic proportions it would be comical if it weren't about to get so many people killed. It's like showing up to a skyscraper fire with a step stool. As you stand there, exposed and confused, trying to figure out what to do with your uselessly short ladder, you discover Blas de Lezo's masterstroke. You are standing in a deep, wide trench that runs along the base of the wall, a feature that British intelligence had completely missed. You are trapped. The Spanish defenders on the walls above you can now simply lean over and fire down into your packed ranks. It is a slaughter. It is a turkey shoot. Men are cut down in heaps. There is no cover, no escape, and no way forward. The attack dissolves into a panicked, bloody rout. You drop everything and scramble back down the hill, the mocking laughter and triumphant shouts of the Spanish defenders ringing in your ears. As the tropical sun rises, it illuminates a scene of utter carnage. The slopes of San Lazaro are littered with the bodies of your comrades. The assault has been a complete, unmitigated disaster. The British army is not just weakened anymore, it is broken, its morale shattered. Hundreds are dead, hundreds more are wounded, and the half-man in the fortress above has just handed the largest amphibious force in British history its most humiliating defeat. The sun rises on a scene of total defeat. You stumble back into the disease-ridden camp on the beach, your uniform torn, your musket lost, your ears still ringing from the endless cannon fire. But the physical exhaustion is nothing compared to the crushing weight of failure. The assault on San Lazaro wasn't just a setback, it was a massacre. The army is broken as a fighting force. The ground is littered with the dead and dying, and the morale of the survivors has hit rock bottom. The cocky swagger of the Atlantic crossing has been replaced by the 1,000-yard stare of traumatized men who have stared into the abyss and seen nothing but their own doom. The blame game begins immediately, and it is vicious. You huddle with your fellow soldiers, cursing the generals for their suicidal plan and the Navy for not providing better support. On the ships, the sailors look down at the pathetic remnants of the army with contempt, blaming the land crabs for their cowardice and incompetence. The already frosty relationship between Admiral Vernon and General Wentworth shatters completely. They communicate only through angry, recriminating letters, each man maneuvering to ensure the other takes the fall for the unfolding catastrophe. It's the world's most toxic group project, and everyone is about to get a failing grade. And all the while, Yellowjack continues his silent, merciless harvest. With the army now idle, demoralized, and packed into its squalid, fever-soaked camp, the disease accelerates its rampage. The daily death toll, already horrific, climbs even higher. There is no fight left. There is only sickness, misery, and the constant grim work of burying the dead. The Great British Expeditionary Force is no longer an army. It is a plague pit. In early May, after weeks of dithering and denial, the commanders finally face the inevitable. A council of war is held, and the decision is made to abandon the siege. It is over. The greatest amphibious force in British history has been defeated by a one-eyed, one-armed, one-legged Spanish admiral and an army of invisible microbes. The retreat is the final humiliation. You are herded back onto the transport ships, the lucky few who are still able to walk. The beaches are abandoned, littered with discarded equipment, freshly dug graves, and the unburied bodies of the last victims of the fever. But Admiral Vernon cannot leave without a final petulant gesture of defiance. Before the fleet weighs anchor, he orders his warships to fire a parting bombardment, not at the forts but at the city of Cartagena itself. For several hours, hundreds of cannonballs are lobbed over the walls, a final, pointless tantrum that does little strategic damage, but serves as a thunderous admission of his own impotent rage. It's the 18th century equivalent of flipping the table after losing a board game. And so, the Grand Armada turns for home. The sight is pitiable. The fleet that arrived with such pomp and power now limps away in disgrace. Of the nearly 12,000 soldiers who landed, more than half are dead. Thousands more are sick and dying. The transport ships that once carried proud regiments are now little more than floating hospitals and morgues. Every day of the voyage home, you hear the grim splash of canvas-wrapped bodies being committed to the deep. Back in Britain, the news of the disaster is met not with outrage but with a carefully managed campaign of spin and misdirection. The government has no interest in advertising such a colossal failure. The premature victory medals are quietly melted down. Vernon's initial triumphant dispatches are celebrated, while the final disastrous outcome is buried in confusing reports that blame everyone and no one. Historians still argue whether any single person was to blame for the disaster, or if it was a perfect storm of poor planning, divided command, terrible luck, and the unforeseen challenges of tropical warfare. For you, a hollow-eyed survivor staring out at the empty sea, the answer is simple. It was a nightmare. A grand, glorious, and utterly catastrophic nightmare from which you were lucky to escape with your life. As the great Cartagena expedition meets its squalid and tragic end, you need to remember that this bizarrely named war is a global affair. While Vernon's armada was succumbing to disease and incompetence in the Caribbean, another, much stranger British naval adventure was already unfolding in secrecy on the other side of the world. It is a story of such unbelievable hardship and perseverance that it makes the Cartagena campaign look like a badly managed holiday. The year is 1740. You are a sailor, but you are not part of the grand, celebrated fleet sailing for the Caribbean. You are on the deck of HMS Centurion, a formidable 60-gun warship, but she is the flagship of a small, almost forgotten squadron. Your commander is a quiet, determined, and deeply professional officer named Commodore George Anson. Your mission is secret, audacious, and bordering on suicidal. You are to sail south, all the way to the bottom of the world, round the notoriously violent Cape Horn, and burst into the Pacific Ocean. The Pacific is, for all intents and purposes, a Spanish lake. Their ports are lightly defended, their shipping lanes are plump with silver, and they would never expect a British naval squadron to appear in their backyard. Your job is to cause chaos, sack towns, burn ships, and if you are incredibly lucky, intercept the legendary Manila Galleon, a vast treasure ship that sails once a year from the Philippines to Mexico, laden with a king's ransom in silver. It is a glorious piratical mission on paper. But from the moment you leave port, you realize this expedition is the neglected stepchild of the war effort. While the Cartagena fleet got the best ships, the best troops, and all the headlines, Anson's squadron has been given a pittance. Your ships are in poor repair, your supplies are shoddy, and your crew is a joke. A deeply tragic, pathetic joke. You look around the deck and see a handful of professional sailors like yourself, some raw recruits, and a shocking number of old, infirm men, some in their 60s and 70s. These are the Chelsea pensioners, Army veterans dragged out of their retirement homes and forced onto your ship to fill out the crew roster. Many are lame, some are sick, and none are fit for the brutal life of a sailor on a multi-year voyage into the unknown. It's like staffing a mission to Mars with the residents of a local bingo hall. The absurdity of the situation is staggering. Historians still argue whether the Admiralty's decision to man Anson's ship so poorly was a sign of gross incompetence, or a calculated risk because they believed the mission was a long shot anyway, not worth wasting their prime manpower on. Either way, the consequences are immediate. Even as you sail south through the relatively calm waters of the Atlantic, the pensioners begin to die. They succumb to sickness and the harsh conditions, their frail bodies unable to cope. Long before you even face the enemy, you are conducting burials at sea almost daily. Then you reach Cape Horn. This is the true test, the most feared stretch of water on the planet. For nearly 3 months, your small squadron is caught in a relentless, hurricane-like storm. The sky is a leaden gray, the waves are the size of mountains, and the cold is so intense that the rigging freezes solid. You live in a world of constant, violent motion, of roaring wind and crashing water. Sleep is impossible. Hot food is a distant memory. Your ship, the Centurion, is battered mercilessly. 2 of the other ships in your squadron, the Severn and the Pearl, give up and turn back for England. Another, the aptly named HMS Wager, is wrecked on the desolate coast of Patagonia. Your squadron is shattered, scattered, and decimated. But after months of this nautical hell, one day the storm finally breaks. The winds calm, the sun appears, and you find yourself sailing on the gentle rolling swells of a vast, blue, and seemingly empty ocean. You have made it. You are in the Pacific. But the cost has been appalling. Of the nearly 2,000 men who set out from England, hundreds are already dead. Your remaining crew is skeletal, weak, and on the verge of a new and even more terrifying ordeal. The storms of Cape Horn are behind you, but the real enemy of this voyage has only just begun to show its face. You have survived the furies of Cape Horn, but as the HMS Centurion limps into the vast emptiness of the Pacific, you discover that the sea has quieter, more insidious ways to kill a man. The storms are replaced by a creeping horror that begins in your own body. It starts with a profound weariness, a bone-deep exhaustion that sleep cannot cure. Then your gums begin to swell and turn a dark, bruised purple, becoming soft and spongy. Your teeth loosen in their sockets. Old scars from half-forgotten injuries begin to ache and reopen. as if your very flesh is unraveling. This is scurvy, the great plague of the age of sail, a slow, agonizing decay caused by a lack of vitamin C, a nutrient no one in your time even knows exists. The disease sweeps through your already depleted crew like a phantom menace. Men who survived the hurricane-force winds of the Horn now die whimpering in their hammocks. Soon, you don't have enough healthy sailors to properly man the sails. Of the more than 500 men who started on the Centurion, fewer than half are still alive, and most of those are sick. It is a ghost ship, crewed by skeletons, adrift in a hostile ocean. After what feels like an eternity, your ship, along with the tattered remnants of the squadron that have managed to rendezvous, finally makes landfall at the Juan Fernandez Islands, a remote paradise of fresh water, green vegetation, and wild goats. For you and the other survivors, it is salvation. You gorge yourself on fresh greens and seal meat, and slowly, miraculously, the disease begins to recede. But the final toll is staggering. Of the original 1,900 men who left England with Commodore Anson, nearly 1,400 are now dead, the overwhelming majority from scurvy. Any sane commander would, at this point, cut his losses and attempt the long, desperate voyage home. But George Anson is not a sane commander. He is a man possessed by a singular, obsessive sense of duty. He scuttles his other barely floating ships and consolidates the handful of remaining survivors onto his flagship, the Centurion. The mission, he declares, is not over. They will continue. They will hunt for the Manila galleon. Historians still argue whether Anson's legendary single-mindedness in pursuing the galleon was a mark of a brilliant determination or a reckless obsession that needlessly endangered his surviving men. Was he a hero or a madman? And so the hunt begins. You are now part of a crew of just over 200 souls on a single warship, pursuing a prize of almost mythical status. For months, you patrol the shipping lanes off the coast of the Philippines waiting. It is a period of tense, mind-numbing boredom. But Anson's calculations are perfect. In June of 1743, nearly 3 years after you first left England, the lookout screams the words you have been dreaming of: sail ho. It is her. The Nuestra Señora de Covadonga. She is a vast galleon-style ship, her high sides looking more like a floating castle than a vessel. But she is a merchantman, not a dedicated warship. The battle that follows is a testament to the brutal efficiency of the Royal Navy. Anson maneuvers the Centurion expertly, raking the Spanish ship with devastating broadsides. Your gun crew, though skeletal, is well drilled. You fire with a speed and accuracy the Spanish cannot hope to match. Within a couple of hours, the galleon is a crippled, burning wreck, and her captain surrenders. You are part of the boarding party, and when you step onto the deck of the Covadonga, you cannot believe your eyes. The hold is packed with treasure. The main prize is over 1.3 million silver pieces of 8, along with tens of thousands of pounds of silver bullion. It is one of the single richest prizes ever taken at sea. The suffering, the storms, the disease, it has all led to this. It's like winning the lottery after surviving a plane crash. But your elation is tempered by a sudden, unnerving realization. As you round up the Spanish crew, you discover there are more than 500 of them. You and your shipmates number barely 200. You are now massively outnumbered by your own prisoners on a ship in the middle of the Pacific. The voyage to China, the nearest safe port, is a tense, nerve-wracking affair, with your tiny crew forced to stand guard day and night over a captive population that could overwhelm you at any moment. But you make it. Anson, the quiet obsessive, has pulled off the impossible. He has turned a doomed mission into the stuff of legend. While the shattered remnants of the Cartagena expedition are limping home and Commodore Anson is battling scurvy in the vastness of the Pacific, the war over Jenkins' ear is being fought on yet another front, one far from the grand naval theaters. This is a smaller, scrappier, and more intimate conflict, fought not on the high seas but in the swamps and pine forests of the North American frontier. Your perspective shifts again. You are not a sailor. You are a settler, a farmer, perhaps a former London debtor given a second chance. You live in a brand new colony, a place that is less than a decade old, Georgia. This is not a wealthy, established plantation colony like Virginia or South Carolina. Georgia is an experiment, the brainchild of a determined and slightly eccentric philanthropist and general named James Oglethorpe. And it is, by the standards of the 1740s, a very weird place. Oglethorpe envisioned Georgia as a utopian buffer zone, a place where England's worthy poor could build new lives on small family farms. To achieve this, he has, to the astonishment of your neighbors in the Carolinas, banned two of the region's most profitable and common institutions, slavery and rum. It's a noble, high-minded social experiment, which also happens to be located directly on the front line of a simmering imperial conflict with Spanish Florida, which lies just to the south. You're essentially a lab rat in a utopian maze that's been built on the edge of a volcano. Since the war began, your life has been one of constant low-grade anxiety. The border is a nervous, violent place. There are raids and counter-raids, small, brutal skirmishes fought in the oppressive humidity of the coastal swamps. Both you and the Spanish in St. Augustine rely heavily on Native American allies, turning the conflict into a complex proxy war. But in the summer of 1742, the simmering conflict boils over. A massive Spanish fleet, carrying several thousand regular troops, appears off the coast of St. Simon's Island, the heart of Georgia's defenses. This is it. The Spanish have come to wipe your experimental little colony off the map for good. Panic grips you and your fellow colonists. Your defender, James Oglethorpe, can only muster a pitifully small force to oppose them. He has a few hundred British regulars, a company of tough Scottish Highlanders, some local militia like yourself, and a handful of Creek and Yamasee warriors. You are outnumbered by at least 4-1. On paper, this should be a slaughter. But Oglethorpe is a stubborn and clever commander, and he has one great advantage. He knows the terrain. The Spanish land their troops and begin to advance inland, probing towards the main British settlement at Fort Frederica. Oglethorpe knows he cannot win a conventional, pitched battle. His only hope is to use the landscape itself as a weapon. He lays an ambush. On a narrow causeway that runs through a treacherous swamp, he places his men, Highlanders and Rangers, in concealment amongst the tall reeds and dense thickets on either side of the path. You are part of this small hidden force, the mosquitoes buzzing in your ears, your heart pounding as you wait in the sweltering heat. This is the moment that will go down in history as the Battle of Bloody Marsh. As a column of Spanish grenadiers marches confidently down the path, Oglethorpe gives the signal. Your hidden force rises as one and unleashes a devastating volley at point-blank range. The Spanish column, caught completely by surprise and bunched together on the narrow path, is ripped apart. The ambush is a total success. The Spanish break and flee in panic, leaving dozens of their comrades dead or wounded in the marsh. It's a brilliant tactical victory, but Oglethorpe knows his position is still precarious. He is still massively outnumbered. So he follows up his military victory with a masterpiece of psychological warfare. He employs a bit of clever deception, allowing a captured French double agent to escape to the Spanish camp. The agent carries a letter designed to make the Spanish commander believe that Oglethorpe is about to be reinforced by a massive British fleet. The bluff works perfectly. The Spanish commander, already unnerved by the ferocity of the ambush at Bloody Marsh, and now fearing being cut off by a superior naval force, loses his nerve. He bundles his thousands of troops back onto their ships and sails back to Florida. Your tiny experimental colony is saved, and you are left to wonder at the man who saved it. Historians still argue whether Oglethorpe was a brilliant military strategist who single-handedly saved the southern colonies, or just a lucky commander who bluffed his way to victory against a hesitant and overly cautious Spanish opponent. Either way, against all odds, David has beaten Goliath on the swampy shores of Georgia. You are back in Britain, and several years have now passed since the bells rang out to celebrate the declaration of war. The initial, heady excitement has long since curdled into a kind of weary confusion. The quick, glorious conflict you were promised has turned into a messy, contradictory, and deeply frustrating affair. You try to make sense of the news coming in from across the globe. From the Caribbean, you hear tales of the almost unbelievable disaster at Cartagena, a national humiliation on a scale no one thought possible. Then, from the other side of the world, a story trickles in that sounds like pure fiction. Commodore Anson, long given up for lost, has apparently circumnavigated the globe, survived unimaginable horrors, and captured a Spanish treasure galleon. And from North America, There is the plucky, feel-good story of how General Oglethorpe saved the small colony of Georgia with a clever ambush and a bit of theatrical bluffing. It's a bizarre scorecard: one catastrophic failure, one legendary success, and one small but vital defensive victory. The war with Spain feels less like a coherent strategy and more like a series of disconnected, wildly unpredictable adventures. And just as you're trying to figure out if you're winning or losing, the entire nature of the war begins to change. The story is no longer just about you and Spain. The old, familiar, and much more formidable villain is stepping onto the stage. France. In 1740, a political earthquake had shaken the continent of Europe. The Holy Roman Emperor in Austria died without a son, leaving his vast territories to his young daughter, Maria Theresa. This created a power vacuum, and soon, most of the major powers of Europe were piling into a massive, continent-spanning conflict known as the War of the Austrian Succession. It's the 18th century equivalent of a fantastically wealthy CEO dying without a clear heir, and all the vice presidents, foreign branches, and corporate rivals immediately descending into a savage battle to carve up the company. For a couple of years, Britain tries to stay out of the European mess, focusing on its private war with Spain, but the two conflicts are destined to merge. France and Spain are allies bound by family ties between their royal houses. Britain, whose primary foreign policy goal is to prevent France from dominating Europe, naturally sides with Austria. And so, in 1742, the little War of Jenkins' Ear is officially swallowed up by the much larger, much more complex European War. Your straightforward colonial grudge match has been absorbed into a global superpower showdown. Historians still argue whether the war with Spain was the true cause that dragged Britain into the European conflict, or merely a convenient pretext for a much larger, inevitable struggle against French dominance. Was Jenkins' Ear the spark that lit the continental fire? Or was it just a minor flame that got sucked into a nearby forest fire? Whatever the case, you feel the shift in priorities immediately. The focus is no longer on the Caribbean or the Spanish Main. The headlines are now about battles in Germany and the Netherlands. The new reality is driven home in 1743 by a truly remarkable piece of news. Your king, George II, a German by birth, more comfortable speaking his native tongue than English, has personally led his British and Hanoverian troops into battle at a place called Dettingen in Bavaria. You hear stories of the 60-year-old monarch, on foot after his horse bolted, bravely leading a charge and rallying his men to victory against the French. He becomes, and remains to this day, the last reigning British monarch to command his army on the field of battle. It's a stirring image, but it tells you everything you need to know. The war is now about protecting Hanover and fighting the French in Europe, not about settling scores with Spanish coast guards in Cuba. The original casus belli, the very reason for the war, now feels like a quaint and distant memory. Robert Jenkins and his severed ear are all but forgotten, a strange historical footnote to a conflict that has metastasized into something far bigger and more bewildering. The simple, righteous anger that fueled the celebrations of 1739 has evaporated, replaced by the grim, familiar reality of a long, costly, and seemingly endless struggle against your oldest European rival. The years drag on. The war that began with such a flourish of patriotic celebration has become a dull, persistent, and expensive ache in the national consciousness. You are a citizen of a country that has been at war for the better part of a decade now. The initial clear-cut conflict against Spain has been completely subsumed by the sprawling, messy brawl of the War of the Austrian Succession. You see the costs every day. Taxes are punishingly high to pay for the armies in Flanders and the fleets patrolling the globe. Young men from your town are constantly being pressed into the Navy or recruited into the Army, and many never return. The fiery passion of 1739 has long since cooled into a grim weariness. Sir Robert Walpole's prediction that the people would soon be wringing their hands has proven to be devastatingly accurate. By 1748, all of Europe is exhausted. Britain, France, Spain, Austria, Prussia, they have all been bleeding treasure and manpower for 8 long years, and for what? No one has landed a knockout blow. The conflict has become a grinding stalemate. And so, like punch-drunk boxers leaning on each other in the final round, the great powers agree to talk. Diplomats in powdered wigs are sent to the neutral city of Aix-la-Chapelle in Germany to hammer out a peace treaty. When the terms of the treaty are finally announced, the reaction in Britain is not one of celebration, but of collective, bewildered anticlimax. There is no grand victory parade, no ringing of bells. There is just a quiet, weary sigh of relief that the killing can finally stop. Because the treaty itself is one of the great shrugs of diplomatic history. Its core principle is a return to the status quo ante bellum. It's a fancy Latin phrase for a very simple and deeply unsatisfying idea. Everyone agrees to put everything back exactly the way it was before the war started. It's like playing a brutal 9-year-long game of Monopoly that ends with someone knocking the board over, and the players just agreeing to put all the little houses and hotels back in the box and pretend it never happened. You look at the treaty's terms and wonder what the point of it all was. Does it address the Spanish right of search in the Caribbean? The practice of stopping and harassing British ships that supposedly started this whole mess? No, not a word. Does it secure better trading rights for British merchants, the great economic prize the war party was clamoring for? No. Does it mention Robert Jenkins or offer any formal resolution for his infamous injury? Of course not. The year that launched 1,000 ships has been completely forgotten, a bizarre historical artifact left to molder in its jar. In fact, one of the only significant exchanges in the treaty highlights just how much the war's focus had shifted. You learn that Britain is to hand back the formidable French fortress of Louisbourg on Cape Breton Island in Canada, which had been captured in a daring campaign by soldiers from the New England colonies. In exchange, France will return the city of Madras in India to the British. You can almost feel the rage and confusion of the American colonists who fought and died to take Louisbourg, only to see it traded away by diplomats in Europe for some distant trading post they couldn't find on a map. The sheer pointlessness of the outcome is staggering. After 9 years of bloodshed, a catastrophic failure at Cartagena, a legendary but costly success for Anson, a hard-won victory in Georgia, and countless battles in Europe, the end result is a reset. Nothing has been gained. Nothing has been resolved. Historians still argue whether the treaty was a pragmatic pause in what was essentially a century-long conflict between Britain and France, or a genuine failure of diplomacy that guaranteed another war would soon follow. To you living through it, it feels like the latter. It feels like a truce, not a peace. The war that started with a single, clear, visceral story, a British captain's ear being sliced off by a cruel Spaniard, ends in the murky, unsatisfying jargon of a diplomatic document that solves nothing. The fire has been dampened down, but the embers are still glowing, ready to be fanned into a new and even greater conflagration. And so the ink on the treaty is dry, and the armies and fleets stand down. You are back where you started, in a Britain officially at peace, but the country is a different place. It is a nation thousands of men and millions of pounds poorer, and not a single tangible thing has been gained. You try to tally the final score of this strange, decade-long conflict. You think of the Grand Armada that sailed for Cartagena with such magnificent confidence, and you remember the handful of hollow-eyed, fever-ridden survivors who returned. You think of Sir Robert Walpole, the pragmatic minister of peace, hounded from office in 1742, his career a casualty of a war he never wanted. His opponents, the Patriots, got their glorious war, but it brought them only humiliation and debt. And what of the man whose anatomy gave the war its absurd name? What happened to Captain Robert Jenkins? After his star turn in Parliament, his moment as the nation's poster boy for Spanish villainy, he was quietly shuffled off stage. The politicians who used him so effectively had no more need of him. He was given command of a ship in the East India Company's service and seems to have done his job competently, fighting off a pirate attack at one point. He eventually died in the early 1740s, a man of obscurity once more, his strange, brief fame having brought him neither lasting glory nor great fortune. His ear, in the end, had a far more impactful career than he ever did. So how should this war be remembered? Its very name, the War of Jenkins' Ear, feels like a joke, a quirky title that trivializes the immense human cost. It sounds like something from a satirical novel, not a chapter of history written in blood. And yet historians still argue whether the war should be remembered by its absurd name, which highlights its flimsy pretext. or as the first major act in the global struggle for empire that would define the 18th century? Perhaps it is both. It is a conflict born of a ridiculous incident but driven by the immense impersonal forces of trade, greed, and imperial rivalry. The greatest legacy of the war is ultimately its pointlessness. The Treaty of Aix-la-Chapelle was a truce, not a peace. It was a piece of diplomatic paper slapped over a gaping wound. None of the underlying tensions between Britain and Spain, and more broadly between Britain and France, were resolved. The question of who would dominate the trade routes, who would control the vast resources of the Americas and India, and whose navy would rule the waves, was left entirely unanswered. The war was not an ending. It was merely a dress rehearsal. And indeed, less than 8 years after the treaty was signed, the embers of conflict would ignite again, this time into a truly global conflagration. The 7 Years' War. That conflict known in North America as the French and Indian War would be fought on every continent and every ocean, and it would definitively settle the questions that the War of Jenkins' ear had so bloodily failed to answer. It was the main event for which your strange, misbegotten war was only the preliminary bout. You are left with the final, haunting image. A piece of human cartilage floating in a jar of brandy. A grotesque curiosity that was held up in Parliament as a symbol of national honor, an excuse to unleash the dogs of war. It was a conflict that consumed tens of thousands of lives, from the swamps of Georgia to the frozen seas off Cape Horn, from the fever-ridden beaches of Cartagena to the waters off the Philippines. All that death, all that suffering, all that treasure, expended for a war that began over the right to sell goods in a closed market, was sparked by a severed ear, and ended with a treaty that returned everything to the way it was before, as if nothing ever happened at all. And so our journey through this strange and almost forgotten chapter of history comes to a gentle close. The echoes of the cannon fire have faded away, and the furious political arguments have long since fallen silent, leaving behind only the quiet dust of the archives. The great ships of the line and the proud treasure galleons now rest in the silent darkness of the deep ocean, their violent stories finished, their crews finally at peace. The ambitions of admirals and the desperation of kings have dissolved into the past, becoming a quiet narrative for us to reflect upon from the comfort and safety of our own time. Let the clamor of the 18th century recede, and allow the soft stillness of the night to settle around you. The story is over, the lesson learned, and there is nothing left now but to let your mind drift, leaving the ghosts of this peculiar little war to their eternal slumber beneath the waves.